Chris, welcome. How you doing?
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Excellent. Chris, so for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, definitely. So where I'm from, I'm actually born in Georgia, but grew up in Miami. So I'm back here, moved back 12 months ago. I started my career in finance, all but 12 months of my life, and then moved into the publisher world. I actually worked for Univision. I see some old colleagues in the room, and moved to New York almost 12 years ago, and was with NBC for a little bit, and then went on to the tech scene. I was at a couple of startups, was at Snap pre-IPO, and then have been focusing primarily over the course of the last 8 years running global customer success organizations, and most recently have been at Mountain. It'll be 2 years now in May. We're a performance CTV platform, and I run their entire existing business.
Excellent. I want to ask you a little bit more about your career because you've had a tremendous career working at great companies, publishers, media companies. But tell us a little bit about who you are, your family, and you know where your family comes from. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm the middle child of 3 boys. And both of my parents are Dominican. My father came here when he was 17, taught himself English, went to NYU undergrad, NYU medical school, and then enlisted in the Navy, and was a Navy sergeant for 8 years, and then went to practice medicine. After my mom moved here right before, like 2 years before my parents got married. She's an architect. I come from I'm first American-born family member, and I had a really good experience growing up because both of my parents were educated, and it's an interesting dynamic coming up in the household that you have to live up to like a father who taught himself English and went to medical school. So it's an interesting perspective to kind of balance. I actually went to undergrad I had 2 majors, biology and a minor in mathematics and chemistry, and then finance, and I chose business, much to my father's excitement because he's like, don't go into medicine. Don't ask me why.
Chris, and I want to switch the topic a little bit and bring it back to leadership, right? As Lynn said in her opener, right? Like we want to, part of the theme today is about leadership, career growth and development, right? And you have built a successful career in customer success. You've built a successful career in recruiting and developing talent and building great teams. Can you talk a little bit about like what is your approach to leadership?
Definitely. I would say if you ask any of my team members in the past, currently, I'm a servant leader, and I'm through and through a servant leader. I had a pretty horrible experience earlier in my career with leadership, and I vowed the moment that I would become and have the opportunity and the privilege of leading folks that I could help cultivate an atmosphere where folks understand what it takes to move from a junior role to a more senior role in their area of expertise. And one of the things that I I'll use a real life example. When I joined Mountain, there wasn't really no difference between like a director, a senior CSM, a CSM, an operations person, a support person, a technical account manager. Mm-hmm. And what that leads is just this area of time-based like promotion, where folks don't really understand like the hard and soft skills that are necessary to move up. And then also providing an avenue and opportunity for folks who are already in leadership, especially in the publisher world, where you can stay as a director or VP for eons. Right. And then what's that next move is not very clear. My goal was always to provide like kind of that canvas. I call it a career lattice. Mm-hmm. And it's a blueprint so that folks can understand, and I can put people in positions that number one, they're uncomfortable with, which is usually their areas of weakness. Yeah. And then secondarily is provide them just a path to understand what soft skills they can continuously work through. I didn't have this opportunity, so I had to kind of build it my own. Right. In the publisher world, like I started in ops. From a BI perspective, I moved into strategy. I ran ad ops. I ran account. I ultimately was revenue operations senior director before I left the publisher world, and I had all these teams under me. I had no historical experience leading those teams prior to that.
Right.
So I'm kind of like carved my own path to get to that point, and it's challenging my perspective, and that's what I'm doing for my teams as well.
Right. And what's interesting about that, to your point, carving your own path, right? I'm sure you've received some tremendous advice along the way, right? Yeah. Can you give us an example of some of the best advice that you've received in terms of, how to move up in your career or how to grow as a leader?
Yeah, one of my most memorable, and I'm like, he's a mentor of mine. Some folks in the room who worked at Univision remember him. Charlie Echeverry was the CRO for Univision Digital.
He's been a guest on the podcast.
And he's a servant leader through and through, but he's almost more of like a personal mentor type of leader, where he provides you the guidance you need, gives you enough slack for you to kind of like figure out like what you need to do. Yeah. And his feedback to me early was like, be as agile as you can be. Because I'm like, in this space, how fast this industry moves, we all hear it all the time. I'm going backwards 14 years ago. It's like, it was a year of mobile. We heard that for like 7 years. And then it just flipped over to it's a year of mobile still. Mm-hmm. But things were evolving rapidly. I remember we used to have on-premise, like DFP, and then we went to DFP Premium. And it was just all these changes that I wasn't even used to using these tools all the time. And I just started becoming more and more like a sponge. And his feedback was, be a sponge, be agile, and don't get stuck in a certain place, because it will prevent you from kind of learning more and expanding in the areas that you want to expand in. So I take that feedback and I consider it like gold consistently.
Gotcha. I recently read a stat that said that companies with great leadership outperform other companies by something like 13x, right? Because of, I guess, the teams that they've built, so on and so forth, right? Give us an example of, throughout your career, whether it's you as a leader, a company that you're working for, or your specific team, where you've seen the impact of leadership and great teams have helped companies really thrive.
That's a good one. I'll use my current team as an example, and it's not just because it's a current thing that's easy. When I started, it was May of 2021, and as everybody knows, not post-COVID, during COVID, and when folks were starting going back to the office or working remote, there was a mass exodus. Folks were leaving roles, joining other companies. People were overpaying for talent, and in the last 2 years, I've lost one person from my organization. And that's not because we're paying more than every other place. It's because we've set this structure where folks understand where they are in their own individual career. Mm-hmm. The secondary part to that is I've purposely challenged my leadership to hire folks outside of the ecosystem that we normally hire. So I have folks that are top performing in my team that came from the hospitality sector, never touched ad tech, ever. They weren't in the publisher world, but it provided an opportunity, because their hard and soft skills are dealing with customers on a consistent basis that are either very frustrated or easily moved into a different area of their challenge for that day. So I can teach folks the ad tech. I can teach folks the approach from a customer journey. I can't teach them to be customer people. And I feel like that centricity I can find in different sectors. So, I was a founding member of a group called Success in Black, and we created a network in the Black community to provide opportunities for folks to join the customer success sector. And that's where we started getting really good talent. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing the team. I'm like, we are doing about 250% year-over-year growth for the last 2 years in revenue. Wow. And from a base, sub 100 million, over 350 last year, we're growing fast. And it's a testament to the group that we're building. Wow. And the team and the talent that we're bringing in, that it's just hungry to learn more and be that sponge and expand.
Yeah, let me ask one more follow-up question to that. So you're going outside of the industry to bring people in that have the skills that you need to build your customer success team, right? I have to imagine, though, within that, you've got to have a great foundation for a training program to onboard folks, right? Because they don't have the history of ad tech, right? They need to learn that piece of it, right? Some of the skills are transferable. Can you speak for a little bit about like, what does your onboarding process of a new employee look like?
So at Mountain, the one piece that I know personally, having come on board, is we have an excellent enablement organization. And they're made from different parts. So we brought folks from online universities who happen to be very good at distributed workforces. We're a fully remote business. So we had to double down on the ability to bring folks on board that weren't in a physical location, which is hard. To be honest with you, we have classes. Like last week, I spoke at our onboarding new hire class. They have the first week is pretty scheduled. And in that session, we had 13 people, and they were distributed across the United States. It wasn't like high concentration in New York, LA, et cetera. It was like all over. We had folks in Spokane. We had folks, one of them was dialing in from Colombia. So it's one of those pieces where we create this environment that it's easy and repeatable process. The secondary piece is my leadership team made a concerted effort on figuring out like what are the specific characteristics in the training program and regimen that we want to tailor towards the new hires. For some, we hire very experienced folks in ad tech who I don't have to like train anything but the platform and the nuances that our platforms have. But for the others that are coming in from a different industry, we've established a pretty good cadence. It's both, we call it in person, but it's on Zoom kind of training. So like player coach scenarios so they can actually talk through situations, and also like e-learnings that we've established. And that continues to evolve. Like right now we're doing our entire customer journey revamp. And those folks are part of that planning process. So the best part is it's not like leadership imposing a training program. It's the folks who are on the ground doing the work, helping create the future evolution of what that program looks like. So we have buy-in from the people on the street. Because I feel like you come into these businesses and you're like, man, this is like, I know this stuff. Or it's the opposite. It's like, this doesn't even make sense to like my day-to-day. Like, why am I even learning this stuff? So it's like hearing from them was very important.
Gotcha.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I want to ask real quick before I ask you kind of the next question, I want to ask the audience real quick. We have a lot of different companies represented, a lot of different folks here. With just a quick show of hands, how many of you have an organization where DEI or inclusivity or equitable sort of programs are kind of like being talked about and discussed, or you have programs and, right? So thank you everybody for showing hands. So my question to you here, and the reason I'm asking is I think a lot of organizations, talk to Kerel and myself just about where they may struggle or where it's hard to build sort of a program internally. So I wanted to ask you about your leadership style and how you make sure inclusivity is part of that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Look, I think there are two things, and one of the pieces that I've been very mindful of is I don't want to use DE&I as a marketing tool. I want to use it as part of the DNA strand that any business that I'm in runs with. So if you actually go and Google our company, we have no banners, nothing promoting the D&I efforts that we're doing, because we do it naturally through the day-to-day business. That's one piece. And because I don't see the value in just showcasing something for a period of time. I want to see the consistency of that in the thread of what we do, how we recruit, what events do we go to, what do we sponsor, the leaders in the organization doing their own due diligence and spending the time in their own way. And that's a consistent beat of the drum. So that's one piece. A secondary piece is, I focus on, I kind of mentioned a little bit around like the recruiting aspect within my organization. Like we have to break these barriers of like barrier to entry on like experience and like schooling and stuff, which I was reading a study in the Harvard Business Review where it showed, and I'm going on the female talent minority that there is in the ad tech space. And it's something around like, for any specific role at manager level or above, women apply at a 56% less rate when they have similar qualifications to a man. And the reason they do is because a man thinks that they can apply regardless of their background and how it's written. Women look at it and say, that's not me. So like we have to remove like those, even those small little barriers on like old school, like you got to have 5 to 10 years of experience. That's a huge window.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
what's the difference between a person who has 5 years of experience and a person who has 10 years of experience? I'm like, and some of them are even bigger. That's like 5 to 15. I'm like, really? Like such a wide aperture. You're going to remove that. No one's going to pick the person with 5 years, but that person may be the best fit for that role. And it's getting that type of acumen established in the job setup. And then recruiting, we don't recruit for color, we recruit for talent. And we look at places that normally are kind of not, folks are not aware, excellent talent sits in.
Now, I have to imagine that there's a lot of internal discussion at times where you have to point out very specific things for leaders to sort of like understand internally. Is that accurate?
100%. I am the only, with the exception of a company we acquired, Max Effort, it's me and another gentleman, but the only people of color on leadership. And it's a struggle, I'm like, it's one of those things where I had to fight and scratch and claw my way to the C-level. I'm like, I've been passed up over the last 5 years for senior leadership positions because I don't look the bill. And I don't fit the bill, for many instances.
That's real. Yeah.
And I'm in this position now, and my goal, as it was in my previous senior roles, is to bring a chair for someone behind me and ensure that, when I leave, that there's opportunities ripe for everybody else.
Yeah, and I want to stay on that point about, you're in the C-suite now, right? And you talked earlier about your career through revenue operations, account management, so on and so forth, right? What do you think has been sort of the springboard for your career in getting to the C-suite, right? Because I always look at career growth and development. As an individual, there's 2 things that are super important in that, right? Your ability to manage up, right? And also your ability, as you said, to build a pipeline behind you so that way when you do move up to the next level, there's someone there to take your role. So I'm curious, how have you navigated that throughout the course of your career?
A great question. So I think one of the biggest pieces, I think it's a preventer of you moving into senior leadership, is the executive leadership team doesn't feel that if something happens to you, that there's enough coverage behind you, that you haven't built that kind of team up from a support structure. So like in my current function, I purposely looked at the organization and I handpicked a couple of folks to continue to groom them as they move into their more senior roles. Like we had folks, one specific person on the team, her name is Rachel. I'm like, she was a senior director for years. And I'm like, I came in, I want to understand what's preventing her from moving into that VP role.
Right.
And at my company, we're pretty flat. So I can count with one hand how many VPs we have. So it's a big role and it requires approval from the board and everything. So it's not like, we just are handing out titles in our company. So I promoted her at the end of November, and it was a no-brainer for the leadership team. It was one of those things, but it was a 18-month progression to get her in that position of exposing her more to leadership, giving her core projects that were her ownership fully and required minimal guidance, and her ability to create relationships and cross-collaborate with other leaders in the business.
I think you just answered my next question, because I think a challenge that some folks face in their career moving forward is they get boxed into a specific role and job. And how do you make sure your team doesn't get boxed in so that they can grow, right?
Yeah, and it's a good one because, for example, we had for Rachel specific, she oversees our technical side of the customer engagement. So we have an onboarding organization, we have a team called Platform Experience, and then we also have Platform Experience managers, which are different in different ways. And they're almost like, if you think about it in your traditional, they're like the technical account manager to the CSM. So they're working in parallel, creating a great user experience. And in that world, it was very much, she was pigeonholed to just the support, and they called it support. And I'm like, it's actually not support. I don't have a 100-person team taking emails and answering tickets, because our platform is not managed. So it's self-serve. And the amount of tickets we get, 15 a week. I'm like, and they're usually more technical oriented. So creating the path and the avenue for her to kind of branch out of her area of expertise
Yeah.
and become a sole owner of that group and represent it in the strategy, the vision, the responsibility on some of the core KPIs that we do at a senior level.
Yeah.
She took it and she ran with it for about 18 months. Could I have done it sooner? Yes, but I was working with her on a couple of different soft skills that I believe she needed so she can excel at this new level. It's not just getting there, it's setting her in a position so she can exceed the expectations at that point. And I feel like that part is probably one of the most valuable pieces that I can offer her. And it's been rewarding for me because I see my reflection in my work ethic through her, but she has all the intangibles I don't have. So like she's going to be a much better leader than I am, and I'm excited for that because now her path is clear, and it's up to her to kind of meet the expectation at each of those checkpoints.
And as I listen to you describe that, Chris, obviously there is a lot of responsibility on the individual who you're guiding and mentoring, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of work for you to do as a leader to do the mentoring, to put your folks in a position to be able to move to the next level. It's just not about, you let me know if I'm wrong, but it's not just about opening the door for someone, right? There's other work and intangibles that go into that to be a great leader.
Yeah, 100%. And it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
I would say one of the hardest pieces for me personally in moving into senior leadership and now at the C-level was I wasn't given any time. Like my leadership they trusted me, but that trust is helpful to a certain point when you're kind of like fluttering in the middle of the ocean sometimes. And that's the type of part where I've personally taken a vested interest my entire career, but even more so now to go outside even of my in my network right now. We founded 3 weeks ago now an angel fund called CS Angels, and it's looking at minority groups that are trying to create technology startups for the customer success sector, and they come and pitch us, and then we fund like their seed round. And these are the type of things that I'm more invested in, and I'm doing this in my own time, so I'm doing double the work. I have my regular job, I have mentorship within my regular job. I just became an executive coach for a mentorship program in the CS sector under Catalyst. And I'll be mentoring VPs and SVPs as they continue to scale and grow over the course of the next 3 months. These are things that I'm doing to put more responsibility on my shoulders so I can help build the future of this industry. I don't like the accolades. If you look at my LinkedIn, I'm posting stuff about my team, about this entire month of women's history. Like I'm highlighting a specific talent that I've been exposed to, either a leader who I had. My first ever manager was a female leader, and I still talk to her today, was in a completely different industry, and she's a rock star. She's one of the reasons why I'm the style of leader I am today, because she was compassionate, and she was a catalyst for people kind of going outside of their comfort zone. And those are the type of things that I want folks to remember me for, less to get like awards and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
You mentioned soft skills and hard skills, right? Can you share with everyone what are some important soft skills to have and some important sort of hard skills to sort of have?
Look, the hard skills depends on the role, but I'll start with the soft skills. So I think communication is such a valuable component as you move up in your career. The clarity, the succinctness of which you provide feedback and just general guidance to a customer and internal constituent becomes even more and more important, because the time that you have with senior leaders is very limited. So if you send a diatribe as an email and it takes the person 18 minutes to read it, and then at the end of the day, the last sentence is a point that you want to make, how do we kind of condense that? And those are things that you learn as you get more experience. So I think the hard skills help that soft skill. But communication, I know it sounds like, oh, this is not anything earth-shattering, but I've seen it work in the benefit of folks moving fast up their career because they're clear and concise. And then the other soft skills that I think are important, and I said this in the beginning, where like folks who are agile, meaning like they can shift on a moment's notice, strategy, approach, and change doesn't fluster them that much, is such an excellent skill to have. I'm like, I will tell you, as an operator, having been an operator in strategy for years and seeing the business shift pricing, yield strategy shift, like on the drop of a dime, it gives you the flexibility at this point right now where, we're seeing headwinds from anywhere. SVB over the weekend, folks in this room may have some level of impact because of that. I'm like, what do? Do you sit and just mope, or do you focus on like, how do I quickly pivot my strategy and ensure that I'm not over leveraged, I have a better strategy approach, I'm diversifying my risk, and you do that in your day-to-day business as publishers too. I'm like, I come from the publisher world, and I understand. I'm like, it's been from the moment I was there, it was consistent headwinds. Yeah. Right. It was like, and then they were throwing more things in, and it's always something. And I feel like the talent, not in this room, is one of the best talent that can fit almost any style of business. Yeah. Because they're used to the agile nature, and it's a skill set that you can't train. People either have it in them, or it's something that they get exposed to and they unlock.
Yeah, I want to talk about this a little bit later today too in a different session, but you've talked about the importance of mentorship as a leader, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about, mentorship in leadership and why it's so important?
Yeah, look, I believe there's a path for folks to have an open dialogue and communication with people who are in the positions that you want to be in. You'd be surprised how many times I've reached out to other chief customer officers 3-4 years ago to understand like and for me, and I'll tell you fully honest, the goal was to understand like what is different in them than it is in my specific, experience. And there wasn't that much difference. So the validation was already there. It's like there's something preventing me from breaking through that mold. But I learned a lot from aligning to certain mentors in the chief customer officer kind of setup. And I would be remiss to tell everybody, you have to go outside of your comfort zone. Reach out to people. I'm like, people are actually open. I'm like, it's the craziest thing is like the amount of no's I got were probably like 2 out of like 100 outreaches. And folks, I was having coffee with folks, a virtual coffee during the last couple of years. I come to these events and I meet with people. And my goal is, if I can be helpful to that person, that's my ultimate goal. And then for me, what I get value for is secondary. So building that reciprocity is important. And it's such a good learning path. And I recommend everybody kind of figure out whatever time, they have to do that.
That's awesome.
Chris, where do you draw inspiration from?
It's a loaded question. I would say the first is probably my mother. I am a mama's boy. But my mom is such an inspirational person, for me. And my grandma, was her mother, who just passed away a month ago, was the first female to graduate from accounting school in Dominican Republic. It's the top university. It's actually the first university in all the Americas. You can Google it. It's called La UAS. And she was a principal chief operating officer for the biggest bank in Dominican Republic for 20 years. First female to run a bank, and just an inspirational person, to be honest with you.
Shouts to Grandma. As we're sort of getting a little bit towards the end here, I wanted to ask you just things you can pass on from, to anyone that's looking to sort of level up, into a new leadership sort of position. What can you pass on, to them that has been significant to you?
I would say start figuring out with clarity, like what your areas of weaknesses are. Everybody tells you, or you hear this in certain instances, a great leader hires their weaknesses, but a great leader understands their weaknesses very early. And that's not something that sometimes you can't overcome it. I'm like, if you aren't strategically analytical, that's not something that you should force on yourself. You should create the supplement to that within your organization, so you have a very good balance. Because what you can offer them is the strategic guidance, the operational acumen, if those are your areas of strength. And I feel like it's even more so on the technical side, because you have organizations like AdOps who are evolving into revenue operations and just core system strategy. You have folks on these teams that are some of the most brilliant minds I've ever met in my life. I have 2 CSMs that were former AdOps and strategy folks. They were performance ops people, and they are absolutely killing it in this function. Amazing. And it's because they're customer people at the core.
Right.
And they want to secure the bag. They want to ensure that bag continues to be filled and the customers are delighted in the experience. And you can see that transition and how how easy it was for them, and then how do we continue to create that dynamic and provide that. So finding that weakness that you have and understanding it early will create an opportunity for you to build the right team structure and strategy.
That's great. All right, fun question for you. What's in your music rotation these days?
You know what's crazy? I'm like, do not mean to offend anybody. I am a huge hip hop guy, and I've tried the mumble rap a lot. I've tried. I'm a big like 21 Savage and all that stuff. But I'm like, I consistently have my old school hip hop as my top 100. Talib Kweli, I was listening to it this morning. Yeah. I'm a big 90s hip hop guys because I grew up in that frame. Yeah. And I'm not trying to be like my dad where it's like, oh, the best rap was back then. But it's a different style of rap. I feel like it's a lyricist component to the rap game that is lost now. But the beats, I love the beats. Yeah. I love the beats. I'm a big beats guy too. So like I love the new age rap where like you do have some lyricists out there that are very, very tongue in cheek, but there doesn't
have to be a trade-off between the two.
But I don't get me wrong. I'm a big rap fan, so I'll listen to 21 and a bunch of other guys. But right now my rotation is like recently Wu-Tang, Talib Kweli, A Tribe Called Quest.
Nothing wrong with that. This year is hip hop's 50th anniversary, so nothing wrong with those names.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thanks for hanging out with us. It's been a pleasure, a lot of fun, and a lot learned. A lot of times, our listeners and viewers like to stay in touch. What's a good way that they can connect with you or reach out?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn first, Chris Contreras. I think it's actually linkedin.com/Chris Contreras. And or email me. Email me on my email. It's chris@mountain, mountain.com. I'm happy to connect with anybody, not only in this room, on the podcast. Extending an olive branch is my thing. So whatever everybody needs, reach out.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for listening and watching another episode. We're excited to also do this live with our friends and our partners at AdMonsters. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.